And I thought, well, that was strange. And I looked straight up again, and there's this triangle about 80 feet long, about 300, 400 feet up, maybe. Meanwhile, my girlfriend's on the phone. Hello, hello, are you there? Are you there? And I just couldn't say anything. I couldn't say a word. And then I looked back up again, and damn, there was this rectangular shaped object as well, about the size of a railroad freight car, but just perfectly rectangular.
What's it like in your industry, in sort of music industry? Do people talk about this stuff, or is
Nah,
it no?
nah, nah. It's like anything. I've been a musician my whole life. I'm here in Nashville. My father was a studio musician here as well. He was a pretty famous drummer. Played on probably 40,000 recorded songs.
The following is my conversation with Trey Ackerman. Trey is a Nashville musician raised in Music City's musical legacy. Trey's guitar prowess and songwriting reflects the city's high standards, but the story doesn't start with him. It's a multi-generational tale. Trey's family, deeply rooted in Nashville's music scene, includes his father, Willie Ackerman, a musician who played on numerous number one hits with people like Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, and Louis Armstrong. Trey's father, Willie, played on tens of thousands of recorded songs. Trey's father, Willie, clearly laid the foundations for Trey's musical journey. Trey literally grew up in music studios, watching his dad play the drums and seeing and experiencing how music was created as a child. In this conversation, we discussed Trey's own experience in his youth of two UFOs that remain a mystery to him to this day, as well as Trey's take on the current state of UFO transparency. A fascinating guy with a unique experience in both the UAP UFO subject and in one of my most favorite subjects, music. So, the following is my conversation with Trey Ackerman. Trey, thanks so much for joining me and speaking to me today. I really appreciate your time. And if it's okay with you, I wanted to sort of jump straight in and kind of firstly ask what first piqued your interest. Where did you first kind of what was the first thing that kind of got you into the UFO UAP subject?
Um, well, so as a teenager in high school, late one evening, I was living in Laredo, Texas at the time, which is a border town on Mexico. Uh, two-thirds of the city is in Mexico, Nuevo Laredo, and the third was on the north side of the Rio Grande, Laredo. And I was living there during my high school years, and it's about 11 o'clock at night. I'd stretched the telephone cord out, onto the patio because it was late, and so I could talk to my girlfriend without being discovered. And I was laying flat on my back on a lawn chair, just looking up at the sky. And it's Laredo, Texas. It's a very hot uh, part of the U.S. And so at night it's probably 75 degrees. It's really nice, and no clouds, no wind, no weather to speak of. And just laying there looking up, and the house was covered with ivy, about 4 or 5 inches thick of ivy, and the phone cord ran from the house to the pole, and it went right over the top of my head. And I noticed a little mouse run right over that phone cord, just straight east, and I thought, well, that's odd. And then, um, and then I noticed what looked like a firefly or lightning bug. And I don't know if you're familiar with those, but I'm from Tennessee originally, and we have lightning bugs every, summer. May, June, typically the June timeframe into July, you get a season where you have lightning bugs. And I'd been living in Laredo for a couple of years, and I was kind of missing that. And Laredo doesn't have lightning bugs, but it looked like a lightning bug kind of danced into the yard. But I thought, well, that's too bright. It looked like it might have the glow of 10 lightning bugs, and it was that kind of greenish yellow color. And it never went out. And it just kind of danced through the yard slowly in the same direction as the mouse. And I thought, well, that must have come from the street light across the street. But I thought it was weird because it was a ball, maybe this big around, just kind of danced through the yard and then went back up over the wall. And I thought, well, that was strange. And I looked straight up again, and there's this triangle about 80 feet long, about 300, 400 feet up, maybe. Black, the color of pencil lead, graphite pewter. And it had green lines just going perpendicular across the bottom of this thing, like it was glowing from the inside. Just green lines, and it just 20 miles an hour, just straight north, just not a sound, just easy as you please, no disturbance to its movement. And I thought, well, I didn't know what I thought. My chin was just on my chest. And I just watched this thing until the trees blocked my view. And meanwhile, my girlfriend's on the phone. Hello, hello, are you there? Are you there? And I just couldn't say anything. I couldn't say a word. And then I looked back up again, and damn, there was this rectangular shaped object as well, about the size of a railroad freight car, but just perfectly rectangular. And it was kind of oblonged and twisted a little bit, so you could see two of the sides and one end. And it had the same green lines, but going around it. So there were four lines, so it would look like five cubes, the same dark metal look, and following the exact same path, just this way, just as easy as you please. And my first impression was, well, that triangle must be towing this thing like it was its U-Haul trailer. And and I was just dumbstruck, because it wasn't anything that I'd ever seen before that I would expect to see. And then meanwhile, this all of this took all of 45 seconds maybe, for the two craft to kind of go by with my field of view, with trees on the left and trees on the right. And I would be facing west, but looking straight up, my feet would be to the west, my head would be to the east. And this thing was flying up from Mexico going north, these two objects. And I was just dumbstruck. And then when I could talk again, I told my girlfriend what I had seen. And she said, "Oh, we see stuff like that all the time." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "Well, there was one object that we could see through the end of the street, and their end of the street went up over a hill." She said it was glowing like the sun, and all my little brothers and sisters were screaming to come out there and look at it. And then it just vanished. And then a couple of buddies of mine, when I mentioned it to them, they'd had sightings as well. One of them said they were driving north from Laredo to San Antonio, Texas, and had seen a red glow off to the side of the interstate, and eased over to see what it was. And it was this object sitting on a riverbank. And it took off shortly after they stopped to see it. So I'd always been fascinated by, okay, what did I see? What was it? Um, who made it? And how did it fly the way that it was flying? With uh, just just being these geometric shapes, with green lights, the same color as that little, looked like that lightning bug that was floating through the yard, kind of the same color. And so I was always fascinated, from then on, as to what it was and how it could move. What was the propulsion like? And has anybody else ever seen that? And I've always kind of paid attention, um, over the years, and you see the little shows that come on late at night that talk about UFOs, and it's 95% just garbage, what ifs, and could be this, could be that, just garbage. But every now and then you'll catch something that seems to ring true, from an experience perspective, that was on par with what I experienced. And recently I've heard the term, by following you and one other on Instagram, and the David Grush guy that's testified before Congress. See, that's got my attention, because of that experience. They call it ontological shock, which is you see this thing and it just like shakes your understanding of, okay, there's something out there that's, we're not the top of the food chain, kind of a realization. And if we're not the top of the food chain, then that takes religion, the question of religion, into consideration. Um, you have to start questioning those things. It just makes you question everything. I think when it's that shocking, and I think that's been that's just followed me all through my years. And this event occurred in I think it was spring of 79, 1979, in South Texas. So long answer. Sorry about
No,
that.
no, that's great. That's great. And do you get any impression? Did you get any kind of a feeling? I know it's it's a speculative question really, but how did you when you see something like that? Obviously, it's shocking. It's incredibly unique. Many people don't have that experience, and it's very rare. Did you
Yeah.
get a sense of what it was? Was there anything that came to you, a thought that came to you, perhaps later that day or weeks or years afterwards?
Well, so yes, your thought is, did we make that? We being like the U.S. military, did they make that, or is that? And we all watch the shows, um, about extraterrestrial life coming to Earth, this kind of thing, and that's really where your mind starts to go. But you have nothing other than that one visual sighting. I have nothing to go on, just that. But again, that is where your mind wants to go, just because of um, how palpable the experience was, and how palpable the memory remains. Gosh, I had to be 15 and I'm 60 now, so 45 years ago, it's still a very palpable memory, and um, yeah. So I think that it makes you uh, steer towards extraterrestrial. Or maybe they are terrestrial. It's a big planet, and 70% is covered with water. So
Yeah. Did you have any conversations with your family afterwards? I mean, yeah, how did that
yeah,
conversation go, or did you keep it to yourself?
yeah. I was very reserved with that information, and I tell my wife and kids about it over the years, that I think that it's real, just because I saw it. And I said, and I know it's hard for you to believe that without experiencing that. Just like if I told you, hey, there's a big yellow bus that just drove by and nobody's ever seen a big yellow bus before, and I saw it, you know, um, you just wouldn't believe that such a thing exists, until you see it with your own eyes. It's just hard to imagine. And for me, when people make the claim of having been visited or taken, if you will, that's still difficult for me to believe, um, because I didn't experience that. I can imagine it, but it's hard for me to accept that as a truth, if you will. You have to take it with a grain of salt, because you don't know what the reality is. You just know their interpretation of it. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So as I tell family, they hear me. I draw pictures for them. This is what I saw. You tell me what it was. I'm not telling you what it is. I'm telling you what I saw. You tell me what it is. And so, um, yeah, it's hard for people to accept that as a reality, I think, without having actually experienced it themselves. Because that, and I looked it up recently, hearing the term ontological shock. I always tried to put into words, how it makes you feel on the inside, and question, your beliefs at the time, and question your place in the food chain, if you will. All those things just kind of go through your mind, in those first minutes after you see something like that and it's gone, and you're sitting there trying to scrub the back of your eyeballs with your hands and wonder what the heck did I just see. And then but then at the time I was talking to my girlfriend, and just to have her immediately acknowledge the truth of what I was saying, and tell me that they've had similar experiences, and then come to find out, having shared that with other friends, it was not an uncommon occurrence for that part of Texas, that South Texas area. It was if I told 10 people, three of them would say they'd seen something as well.
Yeah. Has it kind of reignited things with the sort of 2017 videos coming out of the Navy and I think the New York Times or New York Post,
Yeah,
New York Times piece, and this kind of hit
yeah.
in the media in the last sort of few years? Did that reignite things or?
It felt like validation. It
Yeah.
felt like validation to the experience that I had. Number one, and number two, I had an uncle. He's since passed, but he was a career military police, and he was a chief of police at a lot of these Air Force bases around, like Nellis Air Force Base, and I think he was deputy chief at Wright Patterson, and then quite a few others. So he had a very long career and retired as a colonel. And I had just jokingly asked him one time, probably 30 years ago, when he was stationed at Nellis in Las Vegas, which is, south of Area 51. And that's where they fly those JANA flights of employees that work at the Area 51 out of Nellis. And my wife and I were out there, and I just jokingly asked him about how many aliens he was guarding, or how many UFOs he was guarding, how many aliens he talked to, just teasing him a little bit. Um, and his answer was, you know what my favorite UFO movie is? And I go, no. He said, Fire in the Sky. That's my favorite UFO movie. And then he just completely changed the subject. And I thought, I'm going to go find that movie. So I went to my, Blockbuster, and found the one VHS of that movie, and I found it to be very interesting. And but then that's really the only thing he'd ever said. He never revealed anything. He never said anything other than just that one comment when I asked him that question. And I took it as meaning, you know, these are things that we don't talk about. But if you want it from, if you're curious about what the possibilities are, go watch this movie. That's the way I took that. And then but he was a very interesting person. He had a lot of stories to tell, and I never heard of one. So he was very very tight-lipped.
Yeah. What's it like in your industry, in sort of music industry? Do people talk about this stuff, or is
Nah,
it no?
nah, nah. It's just like anything. I've been a musician my whole life. I'm here in Nashville. My father was a studio musician here as well. He was a pretty famous drummer. Played on probably 40,000 recorded songs. You hear him playing drums on Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire, and Loretta Lynn's Coal Miner's Daughter, and Waylon Jennings' Good Hearted Woman. So dad played on a lot of stuff. So I kind of grew up in the music industry, but it's very fickle, and it's also cliquish too. It's who you know, and it's not something you could necessarily raise a family on from a business. So I've also worked in the IT space for 35, 36 years now. So I worked in cybersecurity for a while, worked in a lot of networking and system administration, and kind of more advanced stuff. And so I've had the two careers, but I've last few years I've focused my energy on songwriting, because both of my parents were in the music business, and then I had a couple of grandparents that were also in the music business. So I'm kind of dual career, if you will.
Yeah. What do you make of the stuff with David Grush then in Congress? And I assume you've been following it. What are your thoughts?
I've been following it. It's entertaining. It's eye opening. I sure hate to hear innuendo of a darker side to it.
Mm,
That's kind of unsettling a little bit.
yeah,
Not sure I want to know, if there's some truth to it. I'm not sure I want to know. I would want to know some, but with hints like that floating around, it makes you think, do I want my kids knowing this kind of stuff? It might be good to release it just a little bit at a time. I always thought, they should leading up, before the last couple of years, the last 2, 3 years of this coming out. I thought they just they should just tell everybody we can all take it. Everybody's a grown up. But then after all the politics that we've kind of gone through the last few years here, I question that. And I think it's probably smarter that they just kind of keep that information, and maybe if they have to release it, just little bits at a time.
yeah,
So I think it's interesting though. I'm definitely following it, and um, it sounds that some of the things I hear are validating to the feeling that I was left with, at the end of that experience that I've carried through the years. And then some of it sounds kind of dark, and it leaves me a little concerned. Do I really want to know everything? Maybe I don't.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's that's always a question that I love asking people that have had experiences is that kind of sense of validation there when you hear kind of these formal people in formal position of credibility saying yes, actually we have got something. It's difficult for us to understand. There's things that we know that we can't really say,
Yeah,
and I think having spoken to a lot of people who have experienced things, they say that you're never going to tell me I didn't see that thing,
yeah.
but I guess somewhere deep down they're almost sort of afraid to kind of be open about it because there's still that bit of stigma, and I guess this is kind of eating away at that stigma. I would hope.
Well, which is nice, and there is a little bit of stigma to it. I don't tell everybody, but I'm talking to you now. I
Yeah,
feel like the stigma's kind of gone. Uh, you know, I'll draw you a picture of what I saw. You tell me what it was. I'm not telling you what it was. I'm just telling you exactly what I saw,
yeah,
and and how it made me feel at the time. And then, let's together let's find out what it was, because I really don't know what it was other than exactly what I described.
yeah,
So I think uh, these revelations that are coming out, it makes it easier to talk about it with people, which is, and I'm a very reserved person with things like that, but I feel comfortable talking to you about it. I've enjoyed following your Instagram. Some of it's probably not accurate or not true, but you don't know that, with some of the pictures and some of the videos. A lot of it, you can't trust a lot of that.
yeah,
Um, but there are some things that have more they feel more truthful. Some of the evidence that seems to be making the rounds feels more truthful. A lot of it doesn't feel truthful. It
yeah,
feels faked.
yeah.
But
I can go on. Sorry, you were saying.
yeah, but I think we're going to start hearing more people wanting to talk about their past experiences, and I'm interested. I have never seen or heard of somebody describe the two objects that I saw, and I keep looking for that. Why don't I hear about this triangle and this rectangular shaped object that was lit up the way it was? And I've never seen anybody else report something like that. So I'm curious about that. I keep hoping somebody will have seen something like that as well in Texas. Surely, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to come back to your comments around the stuff that's out there, I mean, there's some clearly fake stuff, and I think it's difficult for me because I get sent a lot of stuff that people see every day. I'll probably get maybe 10, 15 videos of people seeing things in the sky, and quite often it's just a light. But
Yeah.
the witness testimony that kind of goes with that is quite fascinating. The characteristics
Yes.
are
Yeah.
extreme, and to the eyes, I've seen this incredible thing, and here's a video, and it's just a dot, that
Yes.
kind of moves, and
Yeah. What are
it's
you gonna do with
it's
that? Yeah.
yeah, it's
And give me something that's
unremarkable.
about 200, 300 feet away. That's what I
Yeah.
want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got that thought in your head of, well, do I put this out and kind of crowdsource the information? Because at the moment, we're not really getting anything from the government. We're getting snippets of bits and pieces. We've had
Yeah.
three videos from the Navy, and I think one or two from the
Yeah.
Border Patrol Agency that have been released in the
Yeah.
last kind of 5 years.
Yeah.
So we're not
The
getting an awful
absence
lot
of
from them.
information from the government is telling is it's just as
Yeah.
telling, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely agree. Yeah, and it's very similar to the David Grush thing. And I had this conversation with, I think, with Mick West, who's a very famous debunker. And the question was really, if David Grush comes out and says, here's where these things are. This is the name of the operation, and here are
Yeah.
some of the people that worked on that operation. Just go and
Yeah.
speak to them, and it would be quite easy for the government to say, we've been there, we've spoken to those people. They don't corroborate Mr. Grush. There's nothing, those things are for secret things, but they're not, they're terrestrial, they're human made or whatever. That would
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
put it to bed. But the fact that they don't is very telling, very telling.
It's very telling. It's very telling. It's um yeah. I mean, I know what I saw. I don't know what it is. I know what I saw, and I believe a lot of the other witness testimonies as well. And I find myself gravitating towards the gentleman George Knapp, that's the reporter out of Arizona, I think, or maybe Albuquerque, New Mexico. I can't remember. Um, I find a lot of the information that he presents has a real strong ring of truth to it, um, at least in terms of from my perspective, in my experience.
Yeah, I think he's a
Yeah,
he's
so
a he's a fantastic investigative journalist, and he's working a lot with Jeremy Corbell at the moment, weaponized
yeah, yeah,
podcast, and some really
yeah,
interesting stuff coming out
yeah.
of it. But
So anytime he kind of corroborates or comments positively towards something that Grush has said, makes it easier to accept, what Grush is saying.
yeah,
And it's fascinating, really. It's fascinating. Even if it's all just 100% garbage, it's still a really good, fiction.
yeah,
And who doesn't like a little escapism in a sci-fi show? But I don't
absolutely.
think that's what it is. I think he's telling some truth there. It's not all fiction.
Yeah. If we had if Joe Biden came out tomorrow and said, "Look, we've got some things here. We're not the top of the food chain. There's some non-human intelligence sort of in our, in and around us and amongst us, and we got that kind of official disclosure, let's say on the Monday. What do you think? I like to ask this question because it's
Mhm.
very speculative, but
Yeah.
what do you think the Tuesday would look like if we got this formal on the Monday? We're not alone. We're not top of the food chain.
Well, I think the evangelical folks will hold on to that even tighter. Um, and then I think the people who are on the fence will fall off the fence. And it might open their eyes a little bit to what's being told. So I think you'll see people gravitate. You know, you have a strong magnetic pull here for the evangelicals, and then you have an interesting magnetic pull here to the people who were skeptical of their that religious faith.
Trey,
Yeah,
I'm really fascinated. Whenever I talk to people, obviously I'm deeply fascinated by the UFO UAP subject, but I'm also fascinated in people and music especially, and
yeah,
that probably comes out a bit in some of my stuff on Instagram because I'm just obsessed with music. So I'm
yeah.
very very jealous of you, and
Oh,
having such a rich kind of life in music. And I think I use the example of I'll find a video that I find compelling or interesting, and it might be a couple of minute clip, and it might take me sort of 10, 15 minutes to cut something together. And then I'll spend an hour trying to find the perfect track to accompany
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Music is
yeah.
huge for me. What's it like, if you don't mind talking about it? What's it like, kind of being in that kind of world, and making music and playing in front of people?
It's very natural for me. It's kind of who I am on the inside. If I don't do it, um, it's like, getting hungry and you just start to feel sick. I
Mm.
have to get it out of my system. And Nashville has its own culture around the creative aspect of it. Lots and lots of songwriters here, and we do a lot of what we call, writers' nights. So any night of the week, 7 nights a week, there might be 10, 12 places where you can go find songwriters performing stuff that they've written, um, and only things that they've written. And some of them are great singers, great songs, and you'll never hear them because, um, you know, it doesn't pay to record music and release it yourself. You might spend 3, 4 grand recording some stuff and putting it out in the world. And with streaming, you'll be lucky if you get $20 out of it. And that's going to be a lot of streams. It used to be when it was just radio, you could make a lot of money. One good song could buy you a house or at least buy you a car. Now, one good song will barely buy you a sandwich.
Yeah.
And I'll quantify that a little bit more for you. I have a friend. He was making a very prolific songwriter, probably $1 million a year in royalties. From songwriter royalties. And with streaming, that he was getting paid quarter mil quarterly, give or take 50K. And now he's looking at about 12 to 15,000 a year.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what streaming has done to the songwriting community. Is just basically you basically have to have a job or you just don't do it. And a lot of people do it, but they don't release the music. So Nashville, full of songwriters, and we get together and we play and we do free shows all over town. Um, and everybody comes from the same place. You have to get it out of your system. You can't go, you know, 2 weeks without stepping up to a microphone somewhere and doing a performance and getting it out of your system. And I don't know if you could see, I've got a guitar that just stays by my desk. And when I have 5 minutes, I'll pick it up and write something. I've gotten up 2 o'clock in the morning because a thought has come to mind, and I'll sneak out of bed and come up to my office, or I'll sometimes go into the garage and work out this idea that's come to me. And it's kind of a compulsion. You have to get it out. Um, and I grew up in Nashville. As I said, my father was a studio musician, and he played on a lot of records, a lot of number one hits by a lot of popular artists. Willie Nelson and Waylon and Louis Armstrong and all those greats from the 1960s, 1970s, even into the 80s. Some. And I grew up in the studios here, laying on the floor with headphones like what you're wearing now. I'd have headphones and I'd lay on the floor in the drum booth, and I could listen to the mix and listen to them. I'd lay on the floor underneath the drums, watch Dad play the drums, and just listen to them make records, all day long. And here in Nashville, they would do 3-hour sessions, starting at 10 a.m. So 10 to 1, it'd be an artist come in and they'd record 4 or 5 of that artist's songs in that 3 hours. And that artist would play, he'd come in and play a song, and half the musicians weren't even paying attention. They're just chatting like you and I are chatting. And a couple of them might be writing what's called a Nashville number chart. They just write a number chart down. Then they'd all sit down and play it, and you would think they'd known that song their entire life. And then they might make a change. We're going to put a little guitar turnaround here, and we'll do this thing on the end. And then they'll play it one time again, and maybe a third time, and that's all they would. That's all the time they would spend on that song, and it could be a number one. And 2, 3 months, later, it's a number one hit. And they would do like a 10 a.m. session, then they do a 2 p.m. session, then they do a 6 p.m. session in different studios. So Dad bought like 10 different drum sets and put one in every studio, so he didn't carry stuff around. He would just carry his cymbals and his snare drum and his kick pedal and just go studio to studio. and do that 5, 6 days a week. I mean, Dad did probably in his career probably 10,000 sessions like that, which would equate to about 40,000 songs, give or take. And then, but some of these guys, and then Dad stopped after I think mid 70s. He kind of shifted careers and went into politics and went into law enforcement here. And but some of these guys stuck with it. Um, and Peg Robbins is a piano player that lived up the street from us that I've known my whole life, and he's probably done 90,000 records as a piano player. And I just thought it was normal. I thought everybody could just listen to something and just play it, and it was just perfection because that's the only thing I knew growing up. Um, is that anybody could just pick up an instrument and it just sounded like magic. I didn't realize these guys were the best of the best, and they were creating an era, of country, classic country music, and then come to find out all these folk singers and then rock singers started coming to Nashville because they wanted to play with these, 30 or 25, 30 different musicians that were making all these records. And so you have Bob Dylan coming down and, creating his Blonde on Blonde album. And you have Louis Armstrong, who's a jazz trumpeter wanting to play with these same guys that were cutting records like Good Hearted Woman, and here they are playing with Louis Armstrong on his style of music. And then they're playing, you know, um, a lot of folk and Americana. Well, it wouldn't, they really didn't have Americana defined, but it would be folk. And then it could be just straight up rock and roll, it could be the Monkees or Kiss or some of these other guys that are using these studio musicians. And I didn't realize that's what was going on at the time. I just thought everybody played that way, And once I got older and started having putting my own little garage bands together, I found out very quickly that that wasn't the case. Where we'd all be rehearsing the same song for a month, and then watching these pros do it in just 3 passes, and yeah, they're really really super. I'm really grateful to have had that experience. And just to make it even more palpable for you, you lay in the studio as a kid. And the reason I would lay on the floor is because of the cigarette smoke. It would just hover, the cigarette smoke would just hover in layers. I don't ask me why. It would just be layers like clouds, of cigarette smoke in the studio, and the ashtrays would just be overflowing with cigarette butts, And so I'd either be in the studio or I'd be in the control room, whichever was a little bit less smoky. That's where I tended to hang out. And then backstage at did a lot of live shows uh, at the Grand Ole Opry and a lot of other places. And my dad, he was a character. He was a character. If any dignitaries came to town, uh, Dad was the guy that would take them around and show them a good time. And I'm talking, Vice President Walter Mondale, shuttle pilots, congressmen, sheriffs and DEA agents, and dignitaries are coming to town, and Dad was the guy that would show them a good time. He would take them, he'd introduce them to celebrities, he'd take them out partying where the celebrities would hang out. And you just never knew who you're going to run into if you're running around with my father. It could be Andre the Giant, and Johnny Rodriguez. And the next day you're over at Johnny Cash's studio with John and June. You just never knew. And Dad, he was such a fun guy. He actually bought a used limousine, but it was the real deal, the full stretch limousine. And when I was, 19, 20 years old, he'd call me up. Hey, son, what are you doing? Nothing. Good. Drive me around the limo. Like, crap. So it was a nonstop. It was a nonstop party. So the music scene is all that. There are a lot of really good stories that probably are not appropriate for this form, or maybe they are. I don't know. But it was a blast. looking back on it. It was very rewarding looking back. I didn't appreciate it as much at the time, being a non-smoker and a non-drinker. I remember there was a Janis Joplin session. I was a kid, little kid, and they brought in 2 cases of Jack Daniels. And about 20 minutes later, my mother picked me up from, from the studio. So whatever was going to happen, I was not going to be there. So it was interesting. It was an interesting upbringing, and
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it. I think what I've learned in my 60 years that there's 2 things. There's being comfortable and there's being happy, and they're not necessarily the same thing. So I have my IT job because that makes us comfortable. Um, and I don't have to depend on the music for an income. I get to do it for the love. That's the part that really makes me happy. So I'm lucky to be able to have both. Have the regular job for the comfort, and that gives me the ability to do the music thing, which makes me happy because that's my truth. That's who I am on the inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're very analogous for some reason in my mind. Doing computers and music, they're just very analogous.
Mm.
The type of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Trey, I'm conscious of your time, and I really do appreciate your time. What if people wanted to come and see you, where would they go? Where do you kind of play?
Well, here in Nashville, I'll do some shows at the Bluebird Cafe from time to time. I'll do shows at the Commodore Grill from time to time. Um, um, yeah, it just depends. Hit my Instagram at Trey Ackerman. I'll always post there when I'm going to do a show. I'll post 2 or 3 days ahead. If I do it on Facebook, sometimes it doesn't show up on Facebook until 2 days after the show's over with. So following a story on Facebook or Instagram is where you'll know for sure that I'm going to play a show around town. Yeah, and if it's a big one, I'll advertise it several weeks in advance if it's a good one.
Super. Okay, Trey. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and thanks so much for sharing your experience with me. And I love hearing about the music side of things as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. I really am. Thank you.
absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate
Take
your
care of
time.
yourself, Trey. Thank you, man.
Likewise.